He came in 10 minutes before closing. Dark hoodie, head down, moving like a man who had decided that controlled and slow was the only way he was still moving at all. He took the last booth, the one by the rain-streaked window furthest from the door, and didn't pick up the menu. Esther noticed the girl first. Pink jacket. Maybe 7. Pressed so close to his side she was practically inside his coat, one small hand gripping his sleeve the way you grip something when you've learned that things can disappear. She wasn't crying. That was the part that stopped Esther cold. A child that age in a diner at this hour in weather like this, she should have been crying. Instead she was watching the room the way adults watch rooms when they've stopped feeling safe in them. Esther looked at the man. His left hand was flat on the table. His right was pressed to his side. The jacket was dark enough to hide most of it. Not all of it. She didn't reach for the phone behind the counter. She didn't turn toward the kitchen. She picked up a glass of water, walked to the booth and set it down in front of the girl. You hungry, sweetheart? The girl looked up at the man. He gave the smallest nod. She looked back at Esther and said yes please so quietly it barely made a sound. Esther pulled out her order pad. And for you? The man raised his eyes for the first time. They were steady. Controlled. The eyes of someone who had learned to keep everything he was feeling exactly one layer beneath the surface. He looked at her the way you look at someone who has just done something you didn't expect and haven't decided yet what to do about. Whatever she's having, he said. Esther wrote it down. Tore off the ticket. Walked back to the counter. Her hands were shaking. She kept them moving so it wouldn't show. She didn't know his name. Didn't know what had happened to his side or who had done it or how far he'd driven with a child in that condition before he'd pulled in here. She didn't know that the man in her last booth ran the most dangerous criminal organization in the city, that 3 of his rivals were currently looking for him, or that the little girl in the pink jacket had not laughed in 6 weeks. All she knew was that the girl had said yes please like she'd been taught to be small in the world, and that somebody had put a hole in her father, and that the diner was empty and the kitchen was still warm. She put the order in. Then she went to the back room and found the first aid kit behind the dry storage shelf. What she did next, that was the part that changed everything. If this story has you hooked, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the ending. Esther didn't ask him to move to the back booth. She just tilted her head toward it when she brought the food, and he understood. He picked up the girl without waking her and moved without a word. She set down 2 plates. Eggs, toast, a small cup of orange juice she'd poured without being asked. The girl, still half asleep, straightened up when she smelled the food. She ate carefully. Both hands on the fork. Napkin in her lap. Someone had taught her that. Esther went back to the counter. Picked up the first aid kit. Came back and set it on the table between them like it was the salt shaker. He looked at it. Then at her. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Opened the kit. Didn't look up. You're going to have to lift the jacket. A long pause. Then he did. She worked quietly. The wound was clean through, in and out, which meant she didn't have to say the thing she would have said if it wasn't. She used what she had. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hold until morning if he was careful. She could feel him watching her the whole time. Not suspicious. More like a man trying to solve something. She taped the last piece of gauze down and sat back. The girl had stopped eating. She was watching Esther's hands with the kind of focus that children usually save for things that scare them. But her grip on his sleeve had loosened. Esther noticed that. She didn't say anything about it. She have a name? The man's jaw shifted. Lillian. Esther looked at the girl. You did good tonight, Lillian. Lillian looked at her father. He gave that small nod again. She looked back at Esther and seemed to decide something. She picked up her toast and kept eating. Nobody talked after that. Esther refilled the water. Cleared the plates when they were done. By the time she came back with the check, which she left face down, and which he never turned over, Lillian was asleep against his arm. Head on his shoulder. Pink jacket bunched up under her chin. Her hand had let go of his sleeve completely. He looked up at Esther. She didn't know how to describe the expression on his face. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was closer to the look of a man who had prepared for every possible outcome of the night and had not prepared for this one. She shrugged and went back to wiping down tables. He stayed until she turned off the kitchen lights. Stayed while she counted the register. Stayed until she pulled on her coat and nodded toward the door. He carried Lillian out without waking her, moving slow and careful in a way that had nothing to do with the wound. Esther locked up. When she turned around, the car was already gone. She walked to the bus stop. Stood in the rain. Thought about the way the girl's hand had let go of his sleeve. She didn't think about him. She tried not to. Inside, on the way out, he had stopped at the employee board by the door. Read the schedule. Found her name. 3 days passed. Esther worked her shifts, took her tips, and told herself the man in the last booth was none of her business anymore. On the third night there was a car outside. Black. Clean in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Parked directly in front of the diner entrance, which meant the driver had known exactly when her shift ended. She stood on the step with her bag on her shoulder and looked at it. The window came down. The driver was a man with a broad face and no expression. He didn't say her name. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her the way people look at you when they already know you're going to get in. She should have walked to the bus stop. She got in. They drove for 20 minutes. The neighborhood changed twice. First from tired to busy, then from busy to the kind of quiet that costs money. The building they stopped at had no sign out front. Just glass and steel and a doorman who opened the car door before it fully stopped. The lobby smelled like cedar and something cooler underneath it. The floors were pale stone. There was no music, no television, nothing to fill the silence. Just space, arranged carefully, the way silence gets arranged when someone has enough money to choose it. She rode the elevator up alone. The doors opened into a room that was more office than apartment but had the bones of both. Bookshelves on one wall. A long window showing the city below. A desk near the center and behind it the man from the last booth. He was wearing a dark shirt, collar open, sleeves rolled up. No jacket. No sign of the wound except the very slight way he held himself, careful without being obvious about it. He looked like a man who had never been injured in his life. He was very good at that. He waited until she sat down before he spoke. You help me. His voice was the same as she remembered. Full. Deliberate. Every word placed where he meant it. I don't carry debts. Esther set her bag on her lap. I didn't do it so you'd owe me. I know. He looked at her steadily. That's why I'm here. Tell me what you want. She thought about it. Not because she had an answer but because she wanted to give the question the respect of thinking about it. Nothing, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not frustration. More like a man who had run a calculation twice and gotten the same answer he didn't expect both times. Everyone wants something. Maybe. She held his gaze. Not from you. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the city moved, small and lit up and indifferent. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the booth that night. Like she was a problem he hadn't budgeted for. Like she was an equation he kept running and couldn't make resolve. She didn't look away. Neither did he. You'll come back tomorrow, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Esther picked up her bag and stood. She didn't say yes. She came back anyway. The second visit was brief. King had questions about the diner, how long she'd worked there, whether she owned it, practical things that felt like the edges of a larger question he hadn't asked yet. Esther answered what she answered and left out what she left out. The car brought her home before 9. The third visit she didn't see him at all. A woman named G led her to a sitting room, brought tea, and told her Mr. King had been delayed. Esther sat with her tea and waited and wondered why she kept coming back to a building with no sign on it to wait for a man who hadn't told her why she was there. She was reaching for her bag when she heard the footsteps. Small ones. Careful. The kind that stopped just outside a doorway. Esther went still. Lillian appeared in the entrance to the sitting room. She was dressed carefully, dark trousers, a white top, hair parted and pinned on one side. Neat in the way that children are neat when an adult has taken time with them. Her expression was the same one from the diner. Watchful. Measuring. Like she was deciding something. Esther didn't move. Didn't smile too wide or reach out or say anything in the bright voice adults use when they want children to trust them. She just sat, hands in her lap, and let Lillian look. The girl crossed the room. She stopped in front of Esther, looked at her for one long moment, and then took her hand. Both of hers around one of Esther's. No explanation. No preamble. Like it was simply the next thing that needed doing. Esther felt something tighten in her chest. Hi, Lillian. Hi. Very quiet. Then I remember you. I remember you too. Esther kept her voice even. You ate all your toast. Lillian looked down at their hands. You fixed his side. A little. You said you didn't have to. No, Esther agreed. I didn't. Lillian seemed to consider that. She didn't let go. Esther became aware of someone in the doorway. She looked up. King stood at the entrance to the room, jacket on, clearly just arrived. He was looking at his daughter. At the way she was standing. At her hands wrapped around Esther's. His face didn't change. But something behind it did. He didn't say anything. Didn't announce himself or cross the room or give any instruction. He just stood there for a moment, taking in the thing he was seeing, and then moved away from the doorway without a word. After that, the visits changed. There was no more talk of debt or what Esther wanted. No more brief, purposeful meetings with clean endings. G began making tea without being asked when Esther arrived. Lillian started appearing earlier each time, sometimes waiting at the elevator. King stopped finding reasons to end the evening at a specific hour. Esther noticed. She told herself it didn't mean anything, but she kept coming back. And he kept leaving the door open. And Lillian's hand found hers every single time like it already knew the way. Lillian fell asleep on the couch with her head on a cushion and one shoe still on. King draped a blanket over her without waking her. He moved quietly for a man his size. Esther had noticed that before, the way he took up space without making noise in it. He went to the kitchen. She heard the coffee maker. He came back with 2 cups and set one in front of her without asking. She wrapped both hands around it. Outside the window the city was doing what it always did. Moving, lit up, indifferent to the people inside looking out at it. How long have you worked there? He asked. The diner. 4 years. You like it? She thought about that honestly. I like that it's predictable. Same tables. Same orders. Same faces on the same days. She paused. I like knowing what's coming. He looked at her over his cup. And when something unexpected comes in, I handle it. Yes, he said. You do. They were quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that settles between 2 people who have both learned that words cost something and shouldn't be wasted. This city, Esther said eventually. It notices everything. What you wear. Where you live. How you talk. She turned the cup in her hands. I spent a long time figuring out how to move through it without being noticed. Did it work? Mostly. She glanced at him. I'm good at disappearing. King set his cup down. He looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention that she still hadn't gotten used to. No, he said. You're not. His voice wasn't unkind. That was the thing about him that kept catching her off guard, how his honesty never felt like an attack. It just landed, clean and direct, and left her with nowhere to hide from it. She looked down at her coffee. Across the room, Lillian made a small sound in her sleep and went still again. Her mother, Esther said. She hadn't planned to ask. It came out quiet, almost careful. Lillian never mentions her. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. She felt it change the air in the room the way temperature changes before rain. King's hand was flat on the table. He didn't move it. She didn't leave, he said. He didn't say anything else for a moment. Esther waited. She'd learned that with him, that the pause wasn't the end, just the space he needed to decide how much to give. She was taken. 3 words. Flat and final and carrying the weight of something he had already finished grieving and learned to carry instead. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the window. Esther didn't say she was sorry. She'd learned early that sorry didn't do much for the kind of loss that didn't have edges. She left her hand on the table. Close to his. Not touching. He looked down at the space between them. Neither of them moved. Outside the city kept going. Inside in the quiet, something neither of them had named yet took up a little more room. She wasn't supposed to be in the hallway. Lillian had asked for water and G was out, and Esther had learned the kitchen well enough by now to find a glass without asking. She was on her way back when she heard the voices behind the study door. Not loud. King never raised his voice. But the door wasn't fully closed and she was close enough and she heard the name. She stopped walking. She knew that name. Not from here. Not from this building or this city or anything connected to King. She knew it from 3 years ago, from a place she had left deliberately, from a man she had cut every thread that connected her to him. Quietly, carefully, the way you leave something when you know that looking back will only make it harder. She stood in the hallway with a glass of water in her hand and made herself breathe. The voices moved away from the door. She heard King say something short and final, the way he ended things. Then silence. She walked back to Lillian. She gave her the water. She sat on the edge of the bed and read 2 pages of the book they'd been working through together until Lillian's eyes got heavy. She turned off the lamp. She closed the door behind her with barely a sound. King was in the kitchen when she passed. He didn't look up from the counter. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. The car took her home. She sat on her bed with her coat still on and stared at the wall. The name she'd heard belonged to a man named Deho. She'd never known exactly what he did. She'd told herself that was someone else's business. She'd been 22 and new to the city and had made the mistake of trusting someone who moved in circles she didn't understand. When she finally understood, she left. Changed her number. Moved across town. Filed it under things she didn't talk about. She had never connected that name to anything that happened here. To King. To Lillian. To a woman who didn't leave and was taken. She didn't sleep. By morning she still hadn't decided what to do with what she knew. Whether it was connected or coincidental. Whether saying something would help or only open a door she couldn't close again. Whether her silence was protection or the kind of thing that looked like a lie once someone else found it. She got up, got dressed, took the bus. When she arrived, Lillian was already at the table waiting, spoon in hand, entirely serious about her cereal. Esther sat down across from her and poured the orange juice and asked about the book from last night and let Lillian talk. She felt King before she saw him. He came into the kitchen, got his coffee, stood at the counter. She didn't look up right away. When she did, he wasn't looking at Lillian. He was looking at her. Not with suspicion. Not with accusation. Just that quiet, steady attention that saw more than it was supposed to. She looked back at Lillian. Kept her face even. Kept her voice warm. He said nothing. He saw everything. The lieutenant's name was Park. He didn't speak much, which was why King trusted him. Men who spoke only when they had something worth saying were rare and useful. Park came in on a Thursday morning, while the building was quiet and Lillian was at her lessons down the hall. He closed the study door behind him. He crossed to the desk and placed two things on it without preamble, a photograph and a single printed document, then stepped back and stood with his hands folded and waited. King looked at the photograph first. It was dated 3 years ago. A gathering of some kind, indoors, low light. In the background, partially turned away from the camera, was a woman he recognized. Younger. Hair different. But the posture was the same, straight, self-contained, aware of the room without performing it. Sir. He kept his face still and moved to the document. Her name was at the top. Below it, a timeline. A city she had never mentioned to him. A date. And beneath the date, a name that made something go cold and quiet in his chest. Daeho's faction. Not the man himself. Just the edges of his operation. A meeting place, a known associate, a location that his intelligence had flagged years ago as a contact point. Esther's name appeared in a record tied to that location. What? 3 years ago. No follow-up. No further connection documented. Might be nothing. A wrong place, wrong time. Someone who didn't know what she was walking into. It happened. The city was full of people who had brushed up against dangerous things without understanding what they were touching. Might not be nothing. King looked at the photograph again. At the way she stood. At the date. 3 years ago was the same year Lillian's mother disappeared. The same year Daeho's people had moved through the city like something spreading under the surface. The same year King had started rebuilding everything from the foundation because the alternative was burning it all down. He set the photograph down. Park hadn't moved. He was watching King with the careful attention of a man who knew when to be invisible. Where did this come from? Routine background sweep. Park's voice was even. We run them on anyone with extended access to this floor. It came up 3 days ago. I verified it before I brought it. 3 days ago. Which meant Park had sat on it while he confirmed it was real. That was the right call. King didn't tell him that. He didn't need to. Does anyone else have this? No. King looked at the document again. At her name at the top. At the single thread running from her life into the edges of the worst year he had lived through. He thought about the diner. The first aid kit placed on the table without a word. Lillian's hand letting go of his sleeve. She said she felt safe here. I think it was you. He hadn't said that yet. But he'd thought it. Leave it, he said. Park left the room without another word. King sat alone with the photograph and did not move for a long time. He waited until Lillian was asleep. Esther was in the kitchen rinsing the mugs from the evening when she heard him come in. She knew from the way he stopped and didn't speak that this wasn't the beginning of a conversation. It was the end of one he'd already finished having with himself. She turned off the tap, dried her hands, turned around. He was standing at the edge of the kitchen, jacket on, like he'd needed the formality of it. There's a document, he said. Your name. A location tied to Daeho's operation. 3 years ago. The air went out of the room. She held herself very still. Not because she was guilty but because she understood exactly how it looked and knew that the next few minutes mattered. I know what that is, she said. Tell me. I was running away from someone. A man I'd gotten close to without understanding who he knew or what he was involved in. When I found out, I left. That location, she paused. I was there once. I didn't know what it was. I never went back. She watched his face. It didn't change, but she'd gotten good at reading the things beneath it. I didn't know any of it connected to you, she said. I didn't know about Lillian's mother. I didn't know any of it until I was already, she stopped. Already what? She looked at him. Already somewhere I didn't want to leave. The kitchen was quiet. Down the hall, Lillian slept in the room with the lamp that stayed on because she didn't like full dark. I believe you, King said. Esther exhaled. Then, believing you and protecting her are not the same thing. The words landed without anger. That was almost worse. If he'd raised his voice, she could have pushed back. But he said it the way he said everything, level, considered final, and she understood that he'd already waited. That he'd sat with the photograph and the document and her name and he'd made the only decision he could make and hated it. There's a thread, he said. Between your past and the people who took her mother. I can't see the whole shape of it yet. Until I can, he stopped. I can't have you here. Esther looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She didn't argue. She understood, somewhere underneath the hurt of it, that he wasn't wrong. That a man who had already lost one person to that faction was not going to risk his daughter on the possibility that a thread was nothing. She understood it. It didn't make it smaller. Don't tell Lillian tonight, she said. Let her sleep. Something moved across his face. Esther. Good night, King. She walked to the elevator. Pressed the button. Stood with her back straight and her jacket folded over her arm and her jaw set tight against everything she wasn't going to do in front of him. The doors closed. It was a long ride down. She didn't cry until the lobby. Just once. Just briefly. Then she walked out into the night and kept going. She wrote it 3 times before she kept one. The first was too long. The second explained too much. Tried to make a 7-year-old understand things that weren't hers to carry. She threw them both away and started again. The third one was short. Half a page. Simple words, the kind Lillian could read on her own without stopping. Dear Lillian. Do you remember the night you came into the diner? You were wearing your pink jacket. You didn't cry even though I think you probably wanted to. I noticed that. I thought it was one of the bravest things I'd ever seen. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you keep going anyway. You already know how to do that. You've known for a long time. I'm sorry I'm not there for breakfast. I have to go for a while. That's not because of you. It has nothing to do with you. Some things are just complicated in ways that are hard to explain even to grown-ups. I'll always remember the pink jacket. And the way you said yes please like you've been taught to be careful with people's kindness. And the way you let go. You're going to be okay. I know it because I watched you decide to be. Esther. She folded it once. Put it in a plain envelope. Didn't write King's name on the outside, just Lillian's. She took the bus to the building the next morning early before the day shift changed. The woman at the front desk was named Clara. Esther had spoken to her enough times coming and going to know she was careful and kind and paid attention to the people around her. She handed her the envelope. For Lillian. Not urgent. Just, when it's a good time. Clara looked at her face and didn't ask any questions. I'll make sure she gets it. Esther nodded. Walked back out into the morning. King found Lillian on the kitchen floor 2 days later. She was sitting with her back against the cabinet and the letter open in both hands, reading it out loud to herself in the careful, sounding it out way she read things she wanted to get exactly right. Her voice was small and steady. He stood in the doorway. She didn't look up until she reached the end. Then she looked at him, and something in her face asked a question she hadn't found the words for yet. He crossed the kitchen and sat down beside her on the floor. His back against the cabinet. His shoulder close to hers. She looked down at the letter. Started from the beginning. Read it to him this time, slower, each word deliberate. He listened without moving. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. He didn't say anything for a long time. Couldn't find anything that would land right. Everything he turned over in his mind either said too much or not enough. Lillian looked up at him. She's not coming back? He looked at his daughter. At the letter in her small hands. At the way she was watching him with those steady eyes that had seen too much and still somehow kept looking. He didn't answer. She looked back down at the page and read it a third time. The diner closed at 10. Esther wiped down the last table, turned off the kitchen lights, and counted the register the way she always did. Methodical, unhurried, the end of a shift like every other end of a shift. She told herself that enough times that it almost felt true. She pulled on her coat. Picked up her bag. Walked to the front door and unlocked it from the inside to step out and do the deadbolt from the street. The car was there. Same one. Parked directly in front, clean and black and still. She stood in the doorway with her key in her hand and looked at it. The door opened. King got out. He was alone. No park, no driver visible, just him crossing the wet pavement with that same quiet way he moved, like a man who had decided something and was done deciding it. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see his face clearly in the light coming through the diner window. He didn't say her name. He looked at her for a moment and then he said, "She asked me to bring her here." Esther went still. I told her it was late. Pause. She said this was where she felt safe. He held her gaze. I think it was you. Not the place. The street was quiet around them. Somewhere down the block something moved. A car, a person, but it felt far away. He didn't ask her anything. Didn't explain the document or the photograph or the thread his lieutenant had pulled. Didn't ask her to account for herself or justify the past 3 years or prove that the connection was nothing. He had done all of that already, alone, in the way he did everything, methodically, thoroughly, and without involving anyone else until he was certain. He was here. That was the answer he'd arrived at. Esther looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and pushed the door open. He walked in. She watched him cross the diner floor to the last booth. The one by the rain-streaked window. He sat down exactly as he had that first night. Same side, same stillness, same hand resting flat on the table. Like the weeks between then and now were a distance he just quietly closed. Esther locked the front door. Went behind the counter. Put the coffee on. She brought 2 cups and set one in front of him without asking, the same way he pushed one across to her in his kitchen when Lillian was asleep. He looked at it and then looked at her, and something in his face was different from every other time she'd read it. Open in a way that had clearly cost him something and that he had paid anyway. She sat down across from him. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The coffee steamed between them and the city moved outside the window, lit up and indifferent and going on the way it always did. The diner was empty. The night was long. Somewhere across town a little girl in a pink jacket was asleep with a letter folded on her nightstand. Something quiet and real and carefully chosen began. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like and subscribe.